All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Sweeney. Thank you for coming to the 39th Annual Public Interest Environmental Law Conference hosted by Land, Air, Water. Um, I am one of the conference co-directors this year, and I'll also serve as a moderator for this panel. I just want to start off with some housekeeping things. For starters, do not freak out if you can't see yourself or if you're like wondering if you're muted. This is a Zoom webinar, so everyone is automatically muted and cameras off. We can't see you, so don't worry about it. Just sit back and relax. Throughout the panel, if you have any questions, we're going to be answering questions as they come. So just look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little Q&A button. Just click that. Don't be shy. Drop your question in the chat, and we'll answer them as they come. Furthermore, if there are any legal professionals in the audience trying to get CLE credit for the wide array of panels we got going on this year, we ask that you please fill out the JOT form and look at this Google Doc I'll be dropping in the chat shortly. That lays out all the information you need in regards to getting those CLE credits. And also that same Google Doc lists information about how to donate to Friends of Land, Air, Water, which is FLAW. FLAW helps support student stipends for students who are doing unpaid public interest environmental law internships. So we would really love any donations. They're all very much appreciated. And again, I'll be dropping that link in the chat shortly. And with that, I'll go ahead and start by introducing our lovely panelists. We have Caroline Barnett, who's one of my previous colleagues and a great friend of mine. She's a first-year master's student studying agricultural communication at the University of Florida's College of Agricultural Education and Communication. She has a bachelor's degree in marine science, and Caroline is seeking to pursue agricultural issues in marine communications and highlight areas of importance for essential communications between scientists and others. And then we have Peyton Beatty. Peyton is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at the University of Florida. And she intends to graduate in August of 2021, which is coming up real soon. Peyton is originally from Louisiana, and she earned a bachelor's degree in agricultural education from LSU, and she earned her master's degree from UF in 2018. After graduating with her PhD, she hopes to continue teaching, conducting research, and doing extension work at a land-grant institution. And with that, I'll hand it over to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Megan. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, and then second. Okay. All right, so this presentation is on the water around us. It is a youth's connectedness to water through a manatee-focused electronic field trip. And to get started, Megan already introduced us, but again, I'm Caroline. I am a graduate student at UF in the Department of Agriculture, Education, and Communication. And then Peyton is also with us today, who was as a doctoral candidate and was part of the process. And then also down here is our authorship team, who worked with the paper that we were doing, or the poster presentation we did for this. So Teresa, Trudina, Dr. Lowitzo, who is our advisor, Dr. Warner, Dr. Diaz, Dr. Reisinger, and Dr. Siders. So I just want a little shout out to them. And again, about us, this is for the department we're from, and this is a feature of Streaming Science. And we will talk more about Streaming Science in just a little bit, but Streaming Science was created by Dr. Lowitzo, and it's a really great program that is used for the electronic field trips that we generate and for science literacy. So to go off of today, we're going to talk about Streaming Science, electronic field trips, the water around us, the Restore the Shore program, and then Q&A at the end, although please feel free to ask questions throughout. So to start off, Peyton.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share a little bit about Streaming Science with you all. Streaming Science is a platform that Dr. Lowitzo, as Caroline had mentioned, Dr. Lowitzo is our advisor, and this is a platform that she started, which is an online platform that was created to have an opportunity for agricultural communication students of hers to display their work. So undergraduate and graduate students are able to enroll in a number of agricultural education and communication courses. And some of those topics include photography and print design, podcasting, mobile production through electronic field trips, and electronic educational experiences. And we have two different types of those. And so these hands-on projects that students do in these agricultural education and communication courses that Dr. Lewitzo teaches are able to showcase their hands-on projects through this streaming science website and platform. And so it's really used as a tool for these students to be able to showcase their work, but then also for the public to be able to engage with this science communication work. And so the content is originally shared through the Streaming Science website, but then we also further share things through social media. And so the content that has been posted on the Streaming Science website is then shared through Facebook. We have an Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel and also a Twitter as well. And so as I mentioned before too, it's science communication work that students are doing in these hands-on classes and practicing their science communication skills. And then the objective is really for audience of all ages to have a digital environment to come and gain some science literacy about the different projects that the students have done in those different classes. And so one of those courses that are taught by Dr. Lewitzo here at the University of Florida is called Scientist Online Production and Research specifically. And this is a graduate level course where the students are able to learn about instructional design and developing an online electronic educational experience, and then actually producing this electronic educational experience and conducting research on the impact that it has on the audience. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what the Scientist Online Electronic Field Trip looks like. So you kind of have a glimpse of what we're talking about here, and then specifically what Caroline is going to share with you. Caroline, would you mind going to the Scientist Online slide, the next one? Okay, so Scientist Online Electronic Field Trips, we're kind of going to talk about what that format looks like so you kind of have an understanding. And some of these pictures hopefully will help you get a sense of what that looks like. So what we have is kind of like a one-on-one environment where there is one scientist in a university lab that connects with one or two classrooms of students. And so there's some direct engagement with the scientists, like the scientists can see the students, and then the students can actually see the scientists in their lab. And so we use Skype in the Classroom is the platform that we originally started with, but since we've started that working with that platform, it has since gone away, and so we've kind of moved to this Zoom format to kind of get the same similar results. And so we work with the team of scientists as agricultural communicators. There's generally a team of us led by Dr. Lewitzo, who works with a team of scientists. And each year that we do this electronic field trip, the topic of the electronic field trip changes. So we work with different scientists around campus to get this project done. And so we develop content with the scientists, help them work through that science communication and education piece, and let them bring their content expertise to the program. And so as you can see there, we use a laptop as our main device for connecting with the classrooms, but then we also have a second person there that works with an iPad to kind of move around the lab, give the students a tour of the lab, and then different close-up angles for them to see certain things that the scientists may have to show them. And so specifically the electronic field trip that we're going to share with you today was focused on manatees, and this one was it was focused on water with Manatees being a piece of the electronic field trip. And this one was conducted last spring. It was, the title of it was called The Water Around Us, and it involved a partnership between the agricultural communication students in our department, and they were also enrolled in the Scientist Online Production and Research course. And then also the water ecologists that we have here at the University of Florida. And so the electronic field trips were hosted in a soil and water science lab on campus. And the 3 scientists took turns hosting the electronic field trips depending on their schedule. So we had 1 scientist at a time working with the students that joined via Skype in the classroom. But this also happened during the pandemic, so we did have to switch that over a little bit. And Caroline will talk a little bit more about this specifically. But the different scientists that we had was Dr. A.J. Reisinger, and he focused on specifically nutrient cycling and water pollution. Adam Siders and Emily Taylor were both doctoral students here at the University of Florida, and they focused on food webs in the ecosystem and then the water cycle as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Caroline to talk more about the Water Around Us electronic field trip and some of the cool things we found when we studied this electronic field trip specifically.
All right, thank you, Peyton. So yeah, the next section is we're going to go more in depth to this particular electronic field trip now that you guys are more familiar with what streaming science is and the content that we use to produce this research. So like what Peyton said, it's 30-minute electronic field trips by Streaming Science that we use for online platforms. Electronic field trips, like she said, are really important because, especially now in a pandemic, it's hard to get students to go and experience places, especially science places or places that are in labs or research or across the country. So the electronic field trip is a format to get students more involved directly, even if it's electronically, with these places. And so from that study that we did with the water around us, we wanted to determine the youth's connectedness to water and what their understandingness of water was. And so here is our purpose and objectives to document their connectedness to water through the framework, which I'll talk about in a second, and then to also identify what topics that the youth really connected with and understood from the electronic field trip. So going on to the connectedness to water scale with Dr. Warner, I wrote down here, so basically there was a Likert scale survey that students took at the end of the field trip, and from a scale of 1 to 5, they rated how connected they felt to certain statements from here, ranging all the way to, I appreciate the plants and animals that live in the water around me, strongly agree, disagree, however they felt, and all the way to how much they felt about the water cycle. So this is the scale that we use to determine how connected to water they felt and in what ways they felt connected to water in particular. So I guess here, the more people feel connected to water, the more likely they are to protect it. It's kind of the format that we use to come across how students are interested in science, because most of the times people who are interested and feel connected to what they're learning are more likely to kind of go further into that, which is also what part of this study was about, which kind of goes into our methodology. Basically, we used an 8th grade classroom for our particular study that did the Skype in the classroom version of the EFT. And in this classroom, there were 19 students, and all 19 students completed a survey. Researchers, so we used the connectedness to water scale instrument to examine their relationship. There were 11 statements in total, and the emergent themes. We also did a quantitative assessment with the Likert scale responses, and then we also did a qualitative type assessment where students were asked, what are the top 3 things you learned from this? And it was an open-ended response to see what things off the top of their head they furthermore came up with. And so here you can see the strongest statements that students reported agreeing with. The most agreed with statement from the classroom was, I appreciate the plants and animals that live around me. Oh, there's a little typo, sorry about that. Appreciate the plants and animals that live around me. And after that was, I have a deep understanding of how my actions affect the water around me, followed by, I think of humans as part of the water cycle. So of the 11 statements here, these are in order of agreement. The top 3 ones, and then from the bottom is how connected they feel as a person versus the water around them, if that makes sense. I might be rambling about it, but and so so here is our qualitative responses. I have to say the presentation itself was a presentation on the water ecosystem, and a very, very small part of that presentation was a 5 to 7 minute example of manatees in a water ecosystem and how manatee poop provides nutrients. And, you know, 8th graders will just cling on to that really weird fact and just will not let go of it, which is kind of how we ended up with these qualitative responses. And sure enough, of the 19 students, literally 16 of them mentioned manatee poop in their qualitative response. Like, that was the thing that they took home the most from this entire presentation. Followed by manatees are threatened, endangered, or killed as a result of human environmental impact. And then towards the end was, they less frequently noted that manatees live in freshwater and saltwater environment. So again, this electronic field trip was about water ecosystems, nutrient management, and connectedness to water. Yet the top 3 qualitative responses we got were about manatees, which is interesting and kind of what we're going to go into.
Caroline, can I ask a question really quick?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no worries. What other animals did you include in your field trip? Was it just manatees, or was there, like, I don't know, less impressive microfauna? I mean, it makes sense that kids are attracted to the charismatic megafauna, but I was wondering, like, what other animals were in the field trip?
So in the field trip, it wasn't even about the animals, which is the interesting thing. They only used manatees as like a 2-minute example about nutrient cycling in the water. Other animals weren't really used because it wasn't the focus of the field trip. So that's kind of where that came from. It would have been interesting to see what type of animals would have had a more impact on kids, which is what I'm going to get into in a little bit. But as for the field trip, it was just the manatee for, again, like 2 minutes out of an hour. Are there any other questions?
There are no questions in the Q&A right now, but everyone, if you missed my little spiel at the beginning, don't be shy. We'll be answering questions as they come in, so just drop your questions in the chat.
So what we learned from this study we did was that the students felt more connection to the animals that inhabit the water rather than the entire water ecosystem, which was probably our biggest finding. And this actually contradicts previous literature that stated that there is a larger and more positive impact on student attitudes toward environmental issues when animal models are used and presented as examples. Because in this case, the animal model that we use as an example overcame the main objectives of the lesson and did not get those across to the students we were trying to teach. We believe that further research would be important to help identify if charismatic versus non-charismatic megafauna as an example, as animal models, would be better for impact of students' perceptions on connectedness to water, or even just understanding of the water ecosystem itself. Which does lead me to this. This study actually led me to my thesis idea, which will be completed later this year, where we're going to see the difference between charismatic versus non-charismatic megafauna and how that impacts animals or animal models on students. So essentially, we're wondering is, does the level of charisma an animal possesses influence how much information someone will retain, because we know that an animal that is perceived as cute or cuddly or scary will gain more attention from the people, but how much attention is good attention versus how much attention is going to negate the actual point you're trying to get across for whatever lesson you're trying to give, like, for example, a water ecosystem. Our electronic field trip was a 45-minute field trip on nutrient cycling and a water ecosystem, and a 2-minute attention grabber about manatees to get kids' attention actually overcame the main objectives of the field trip itself. So we're hoping future studies, and in this field trip, in this future research that I'm hoping to do later this year, is to give the same presentation 3 different times with the exact same presentation, same material, same objectives, but we're going to change the mitigating example used throughout all 3 presentations with varying degrees of cute animals. I mean, ranging anywhere from a sea turtle to an oyster, because most people don't think an oyster is as cute as a sea turtle, but again, that's my personal opinion. You could have a different one. That's up to you. And then to determine, after they get that presentation, we're going to give them the same survey and see what parts of the lesson they retained. Are the people who had the electronic field trip with a sea turtle more concerned about the sea turtle and not estuaries and mangroves, versus the people who did not have a charismatic animal, as an example? Will they have more of an understanding of estuaries and mangroves because they had not as much of an attention-seeking example? And this is important not only in how you present material, it's important in how you communicate policy, it's important in how you communicate information. It's important because you want to have that hook. I mean, you have a hook in an essay, you have a hook in a speech. However you start something, you want to draw your readers and your audience's attention, but you don't want to overcome your overall objective. You don't want to overcome the purpose of why you're trying to speak to people. If you're trying to do policy on mangroves and you use sea turtles as an example for mangrove environments, and the only thing people come away from that is that sea turtles are cute and important, and not that mangroves need to be regulated more so people don't cut them down in their backyards. I mean, to what extent can we use these examples in our presentations? And so it's a very interdisciplinary idea and topic on how to utilize the examples, because we understand that cute animals definitely get your attention. I mean, if I put like a baby duck on the screen, I'm sure you guys would be looking at the picture more than me. And so it's just how we can use a person's empathy in a way that's purposeful and is productive, but not overcoming why we even came here, I guess.
Caroline,
So
we have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Sorry. CJ asked, do students find alligators charismatic in Florida? I understand they aren't cute. Well, that's rude. They are cute. But they sure are cool. Have you seen anything with alligators in your research?
Alligators in particular, not in any research I have found so far. I also have not been particularly looking. However, I can say I feel like people in Florida know more about alligators than they do about phytoplankton, for example. But that doesn't, but that's kind of the point we're saying. It's like, does that mean phytoplankton aren't important versus alligators are important? So no and yes, it depends on the person you're asking, I guess. And in Florida, most people know how to outrun an alligator by the time they're 5 versus like how cute they think it is. I think it just depends on the perspective you're taking. But charismatic level, I don't know.
I don't know about you, Caroline, but I learned how to outrun an alligator when we learned stop, drop, and roll, like in kindergarten. Fun fact about Florida and alligators.
We love those guys. Are there any other questions, or was that it?
That was it.
Okay. So this slide in particular, this QR code actually links to a Spark page that we made with this study. So I talked about it a lot. I might have rambled more about what I wanted to do with the results of the study. So if you want to learn more about the Water Around Us Youth Connectedness, you can just scan this right here. I will also provide a link for when this is recorded for like the YouTube description area if you want to look at it, but this should work fine. So give that a second. If you're curious, you don't have to look at it, that's fine. Okay. So moving on is Restore the Shore. So what I just talked about was an electronic field trip with streaming science and the research we did. So I kind of wanted to show where we were going with this kind of stuff. And our current project with streaming science is called Restore the Shore, where we're going to be focusing on living shorelines in Florida and youth literacy on this issue, like erosion, climate change, sea level rise, storm surge, that kind of stuff. So this project focuses on how our shorelines are changing over time and how we can protect them due to climate change, sea level rise, natural disasters that cause shorelines to break down. I mean, you have a hurricane come in, and these shorelines are important to negate the negative effects of storm surge and other weather. They also impact animal communities, ocean, our oceans, plants, and even human infrastructure on the coast, because, I mean, you think of Florida, you think of all the condos and beach houses that are right up there with the water that are first to go. And so we are going to be introducing students to the Living Shoreline Project through virtual reality tours and electronic field trips with our scientists. And again, we're gonna hope to see what parts of the information the kids retain from these projects, whether it's about the overall objectives, if it's about maybe a certain example that they cling to. We'll try not to mention manatee poop this time. Maybe that'll ring a few bells for some students. So here's some pictures of us facilitating the electronic field trip, or the before part of it, where we are getting the media for our virtual tours and stuff. And I did want to show you, I think I might have to stop share and reshare. Is that okay, Megan?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I wanted to show everyone one of the virtual tours that we were working on. Okay, well. I'm trying, everybody. Okay, can you guys see the tour? Is it not the PowerPoint anymore? Okay, so for example, here we're compiling a literal virtual tour of a living shoreline, and people and the students can interact with different facets of the tour. I mean, even parts of the tour like an oyster dome, like kids can look inside of it and see the different structures of it, how it was made, like what the heck this tool is, that kind of stuff. So it's just like kind of important stuff that we wanted to use for our electronic field trips. I won't go too much into that. And that concludes what we were saying. Here is my email and Peyton's email if you have any questions. Also, please check out the Streaming Science website. There are a lot of other electronic field trips and studies and photo essays and Spark pages on different science literacy projects and media, and it's honestly a wealth of knowledge, and I think it would be really important if you guys checked it out. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline and Peyton. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I can go ahead and get us started. I have a couple of questions lined up. I was going to ask, how did you go about selecting your sample? Like, was there a reason you picked 8th graders, like based on like their own knowledge and their own learning curve?
Do you want me to take this one, Caroline?
Mm-hmm.
So we primarily chose the 8th grade classroom. This was the first time we had used the Connectedness to Water scale, and we were particularly trying to try that scale out with a classroom. And then we had access, the classroom that we used was part of the lab school here at the University of Florida and was willing to participate in that. Sometimes when we're studying youth, it's a little bit harder to work with them because they are underage. And so the lab school was a little bit easier access in that to get us started with this project in the Connectedness to Water scale. And so it was also a classroom that was willing to participate as a whole classroom and not just individual students. And so a lot of our projects, sometimes we work with students across a bunch of different schools, but we specifically wanted to look at a whole entire classroom. And so that's how we kind of got to the sample that we chose. Yeah.
And then yesterday, we had I think it was yesterday, we had a panel that was all about talking with kids about climate change. You know, they are the next generation. But I know it's important when you're talking to kids about climate change to not be too doomsday, but also like you have to be, you know, accurate. So do you all have any tips or experience with how you all communicate with kids about serious issues such as climate change?
I think the most important thing about that is to be real with the students, because they are the ones that are going to be handling this situation in the future. There's no point sugarcoating it, and that's just my opinion. And I also think it's important to, instead of just telling it in such a straight or flat manner about doomsday kind of stuff, it's just important to see more how it'll impact your future, how it's going to impact your daily life, and how that's going to change should things not change now. So I think that's probably the best way. And then another way would probably be to, again, introduce something interesting about it to gain that attention and focus, and then from there move on to a broader topic and talk about it.
Peyton, do you have any pro tips for us?
No, and I think Caroline's study that she's doing, I think, is going to be important in that too. What is the right amount of engagement with something that helps them connect to it, but at what point are we taking away from the message, I think is important too, because the message that you're trying to get across, such as climate change and things like that, are important. And so we want to make sure that that is coming across, but also finding what level of engagement you need from other things to kind of get them connected to that and then give them their message.
So we have two questions lined up in the Q&A. The first one is, if animals can increase empathy, what's the next step to get people to act and care for water in their community?
So from here, there's actually there's a lot of terminology for this. There's charismatic megafauna, which is what's like a cute large animal that kind of gains that empathy. But then there's also flagship species, which is when you use any animal, it could be charismatic megafauna or not, and use it for a further means to an end. So flagship species, you use a sea turtle as a way to gain empathy and attention for mangroves or estuary systems. So I think that's a really big step that we need to take, is to utilize these charismatic animals and use them to gain people's empathy, like for sea level rise or climate change, like, hey, if we don't do anything with this, like, you're going to lose these cute animals. But I think it's also, but what I'm looking at is I think it's also important to understand that that's not all there is to it. Like, you want to use these examples to gain the empathy of the people around you so that they feel connected to what you're talking about, but it doesn't overshadow the point, you know, that it's not about sea turtles. We're using them as an example. It's not the entire thing that we're trying to get across to people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would also add to that too, the electronic field trip piece, where we're getting them connected to scientists and then learning about these bigger issues through animals or some type of model, I think is the first step. I think in addition to designing our electronic field trips, and this is something Sherman Science and Dr. Luizzo have been working on for quite some time, and we're growing each year. We've Streaming Science has been around for 5 years and has just been growing each year. And so some of the things that we're trying to get to are creating these wraparound experiences for these students, and not just letting the electronic field trip be the only engagement they have with this topic. So experiences that go before the electronic field trip, that build up to the electronic field trip, and then experiences after that they have to actually engage with more hands-on than this, just the virtual experience. Like, the virtual experience should be a piece of it, but maybe not the whole thing. And then getting them actually hands-on with something that is actually contributing to this issue or helping mitigate the issue. And so there are also like citizen science projects that students can be involved in, where they're actually contributing to like the base of science, and then also collecting data as part of a project that they are being a citizen in. And so other things like that can also help take that to the next level of actual like physical engagement with behavior change and adding to that.
Great. So the next question is from Kate. She's asking, did you ask students afterwards about ideas they had for protecting water and manatees? When I did something similar with adults studying ESL, it was this questions and these answers were what people had learned and thought about seemed to come together. And hopefully the ideas would influence how they took care of water.
I don't, that was not a part of the questions that we asked these students. We just did survey research with them. We didn't get to, we didn't ask that question specifically in the survey. And then we didn't move on to do something more in depth like focus groups or interviews with the students. But that is something good that we can add to our little toolkit if you don't mind us stealing some of that to use in our upcoming electronic field trips and then the ones we do after that as well.
And in future studies later this year that I'm hoping to accomplish, we were considering the idea of doing focus groups after the presentations to see more in depth what parts are drawing attention and then what parts that inspired others to want to do conservation or environmentalism. So.
And Kate is just following up and she wanted to say that the focus species was salmon.
Oh, cool.
Oh, I love salmon.
Me too. So then someone else asked, what do you all hope to do next after you graduate?
Oh, that question seems very real right now. I am hoping to continue my research and then also pieces of education and extension as well in some capacity. And that might be in the academic setting or in helping other companies conduct social science type research to further their education and communication on the topics that they're doing. So
Peyton, I have a follow-up question. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
When you say continue your research, is this the bulk of your research, these electronic field trips, or do you have like other projects in the works?
Caroline is more focused on like the content of the electronic field trip, and I'm more interested in using instructional and communication technologies as a tool for education and communication. And so working with like professional educators that could be like high school teachers, that could also be faculty at universities, non-formal educators in counties and communities and stuff like that to use instructional and communication technologies and how that specifically impacts the audiences that they're working with.
We have 2 more questions in the chat. CJ is asking, are there ways we can make animals cute, like making them mascots of schools, partnering with someone like Disney to make a sea turtle the main character? I guess Crush just doesn't cut it as the main character in Finding Nemo, right?
I think there's a lot of different ways that you could go about this. There's a lot of studies that look at what makes an animal charismatic, and a lot of it is the human type aspects, like having eyes. Again, I'll use my oyster example, because for me, they're just the boogers of the sea, but most people don't think they're like cute and cuddly. And so I think if you were to animate or like provide backstory to animals like you do see in these Disney movies or characters, that could have a really large impact on public knowledge and awareness. It's actually a double-edged sword though, because it could go either way. I mean, you see movies like Jaws, and public perception of sharks has shifted negatively because of this. So multimedia plays a huge role, and any way you can characterize an animal is important via like a storybook, an authorship. I guess movies would probably be the biggest one, just how we are now with Disney and Pixar and all that kind of stuff. So that's probably a way you could do it versus just telling someone about it. I mean, I think if I were to like animate an oyster and give it eyes, people might think it's more cute than just like the rocket is, but.
I totally see that double-edged sword you're talking about, because do you remember with Finding Nemo? I was reading a study that when Finding Nemo first came out, everyone like wanted a clownfish. And then they were almost like threatened because we were taking them off the reefs. And then when Finding Dory came out, there was this, Disney had a huge campaign that was like, do not go out and buy a specific blue tang. Like they cannot they cannot reproduce in captivity. So just like don't buy one. You're just gonna harm the species. So then our next question is from the Seaford Environmental Alliance. I don't know if I said that correctly. Do you all have any comments regarding youth talking about climate issues as opposed to adults? Which age is the best messenger of these issues?
First of all, I'm new here. I'm a first-year graduate student, and I feel like I need to say that. And
You're killing it, though.
My bachelor's degree is in marine science, like the STEM science, and then I switched to communication for my graduate program. So with that experience that I have, I've noticed that I am not going to give a talk to like kindergartners, and depending on the age is really depending on how you present the material in a way that's understandable in like bite-sized pieces, and that the older your audience is or the more targeted your audience is probably the more engagement you're going to have. So like, for example, giving this talk for, environmentalism at an environmental kind of conference, y'all are going to be a little bit more interested than had I just like maybe ranted about this on my Facebook. So it really just depends on your audience and how you cater your presentation to them. So I think doing an audience analysis is really important to get a feel for maybe what type of learning your audience is more susceptible to, whether it's visual, auditory, or even like hands-on when we can do hands-on things in the future. And then age-wise, I don't think there's a certain age that's better than the other. I think getting the information out to anyone who's willing to listen to it is important. And I don't think you should restrict certain audiences just because of where they are located or how old they are or maybe how interested they might be. If someone's really interested in it, then hopefully they'll follow up with it. That's kind of how I majored in marine science, and my parents were thrilled. They are now, but that kind of fun stuff. And I think it's just how you cater to that. So.
Yeah, and that's also a piece of that class that Dr. Luzzo teaches is getting the agricultural communication students to work with the scientists and then have that dialogue with the scientists about like what type of audience we're talking to. So like the class that we did the electronic field trip with this past year was 8th grade students, and kind of helping the scientists get to that level of communicating with those 8th grade students or whatever type of students that we're talking with. And so that kind of gives the agricultural communication students in the classroom that Dr. Luzzo is teaching opportunities to work with scientists and help them develop those types of communication platforms for correct audiences.
So I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, but I have a question for you, Peyton.
Yeah.
With your research regarding electronic field trips, have you seen any like changes or momentum in that given the pandemic and sort of, I don't know, the normalization of Zoom? Like I'm finding that with like environmental law conferences or any sort of, a lot of communication you used to previously do in person can very much easily be online, and then it's more accessible to I don't know, like low-income communities, or like you all can teach about manatees to people in Kansas who have like never seen one in their entire life. So how do you see this like growing and changing and becoming more popular through the pandemic?
So actually, it's funny that you asked this because I have an example for you. And so my dissertation actually focused on extension agents. And so for those of you who might not be familiar with extension is like non-formal education programs that are in every county, which are then connected to the university. And so we take the extension agents, their primary role is to work with the university scientists to be able to then create knowledge and behavior change within their specific communities and their counties that they're working in. And so my dissertation is specifically focused on extension agents who work in the counties Sometimes they're called extension educators as well, in different states. And so I developed my dissertation idea before the COVID pandemic was ever even thought about. And I really wanted to study instructional and communication technologies and how they're using them to connect with their audiences and their communities. And like mid dissertation is when the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And so I actually put a question about their extension agents' attitude towards instructional communication technologies, and them using those in their programs, like how they felt before the COVID-19 pandemic, and now how do they feel being forced to use them during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I honestly did not know how that question would go and what answers I would get. I thought that it could go either way, in terms of them kind of like rebelling against having to use them because they were forced to use them, or them coming around to it because they were forced to use them and they actually like it. And so they actually had like a more positive attitude about instructional communication technologies once the COVID-19 pandemic actually happened. And so that was good to see that they're being more willing to use it and are adapting to that quickly, so that we are connecting with different types of audiences about the work that they're doing, and then being able to create that knowledge and behavior change in their communities using instructional and communication technologies.
So we just have a comment from the Seaford Environmental Alliance. They're saying at the Newport Aquarium, Oregon, staff have observed that adults are more likely to, or are more receptive to youth talking about climate issues than from adults. That's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for sharing.
And then my next question is, Caroline, you talked a lot about, knowing your audience and how important your audience is. I'm looking at our audience right now and I see a lot of future environmental law professionals. So how can people who are, aiming for careers in environmental law or who are currently practicing in that area, how should we and can we take what we learned from this panel today and apply it to our field?
I think the best thing from what we were presenting today for this type of audience is how best to present your information. Instead of just giving a talk to someone, how can you make it more interactive? How can you make it, I'm not saying that you should be giving adults electronic field trips, but I mean, how can you make maybe virtual tours or more electronic engagement as a way to immerse your audience into your problem to make it more realistic? I feel like if instead of talking to your audience, you can engage them in this way, you might find people are more receptive to wanting to change their opinion or perception or take action. Obviously, like I don't know if there's a study, there probably is, but I think that's an important thing to take away from what we were talking about today. You're muted.
Thank you. So those are all my questions. Are there any other questions from the audience? We still have about 10 minutes left of Q&A time. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you all for coming. If anyone needs that link that I mentioned in the beginning where I talked about if you came in late or something, if you are a legal professional and you're hoping to get CLE credit from any of the panels we have going on this weekend, please look to that link in the Q&A. It outlines all the information you need to rack up those CLE credits and how to pay through the JET form we have. That link also, or that document also has all the information to donate to Friends of Land, Air, Water, which is FLAW. They provide stipends to students here at the University of Oregon who are pursuing unpaid public interest environmental law internships over the summer. And any donations are greatly appreciated. So if you need that link or you can't see it in the Q&A, just ask for it. I'll hang around for the next few minutes to provide any links that you need, or if you need the link to the brochure, just ask for it in the Q&A and I'll also provide it. But thank you all for coming, and thank you to our panelists, Caroline and Peyton. Your research is really engaging and interesting, and I wish you the best of luck with all the research you have moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Doesn't look like anybody's asking for the links I mentioned, so I'm going to go ahead and end this call. Thank you all for coming. Have a great day.